Welcome back to the channel, everybody. It is December 15th and it's about 50 degrees out here, and so we get to come back outside to do an episode, which is perfect timing because the topic that we're going to be talking about in today's episode is the 5 best wintertime baits.
Okay.
But not just baits, but also the tactics to use them and use them efficiently. 5 best baits, guys. You're seeing that all over YouTube. I'm not trying to copy that, but we're going to talk about those baits, but more importantly, when and how. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Mark Fisher.
I'm Megan Fuller.
So we're going to talk about wintertime baits, Megan, but
Okay.
more importantly, we're going to talk about what tactics to use in the wintertime and what things to look for in the wintertime. And I'm going to start out right now, give a piece of juice right off the bat, okay? Wintertime, in my experience, wintertime fishing, it's either going to be good or it's going to be bad. Okay. I know that sounds weird to you, but there are times when fishing can be okay, and then there's other days when it's gangbusters. Okay. I'm saying that in the wintertime, you can have a lot of days when it's just flat out bad. How many fish did you catch? None. One. Okay. That's a bad day.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Or you can come back going, oh, we slayed them. That's pretty typical in the winter. It's going to be one extreme or the other.
Okay.
It's not going to be, well, we caught a few here and there.
So no middle ground.
Yeah, not a lot of middle ground in the wintertime.
All right.
But knowing the reason for that is really important. In the wintertime, these fish are grouped up, and they're grouped up in specific places. So if you do get a bite, boy, you better want to key in on that place because there's likely to be a bunch of fish there.
Okay.
And you might want to use different tactics if one tactic catches a fish but then doesn't catch any more. You might want to stay in the same place and switch to a different tactic. Let's talk a little bit about the baits that I think you should be using in the wintertime.
Okay, let's do it.
So we're talking about winter baits. So I got my little stocking, and we'll see what's in this stocking for winter baits. The first one and foremost, this is, again, these are no brainers here, but a little blade bait. This is a blade bait by Molex, which is a phenomenal bait. But blade baits, Megan, are really good wintertime baits, and they're good because fish are typically hugging the bottom. They're in those, they got their bellies buried in the mud, and so you get that blade bait down there in front of them and kind of just pop it up off the bottom. You can get a reaction strike in the wintertime with a blade bait. There is a good thing and a bad thing about wintertime when it comes to baits. I don't have very many rods on my deck, but one of the baits that I will always have tied onto one of those rods would be a blade bait. Okay. The next bait that's in the stocking is your very favorite, what do you call it?
The platypus.
The platypus, a jerk bait. A jerk bait is a good wintertime bait because, again, what happens in the winter is a lot of the bait fish are dying off as that water gets cold. And so a jerk bait meets a couple of different categories that we want in the wintertime. Number one, it imitates a dying bait fish. Number two, you can cover a lot of water because what we're talking about is fish are grouped up, which means they're not spread out, which means you may have to go do a lot of fishing until you locate that group of fish.
Okay.
And being able to cover water with a jerk bait is a good way to do that. Now you're covering water quickly. You get to a place where you get a bite and you're like, okay, now it's time to slow down and let's see if there are more fish there. So a jerk bait is a good bait to use in that type of strategy.
Okay. And once you've kind of slowed down and do you stick with that bait as well, or then do you move on to
I would.
another bait?
So I'm working a jerkbait along, and I end up coming across a fish. At that point, yeah, I'm going to keep throwing the jerkbait. I'm not going to move. I'm going to keep throwing the jerkbait. If I get bit some more, great. But I'm not going to move before I switch baits and see if I can't trigger some more bites on a different type of bait, which is a great idea. I wonder if I got a bait that I would switch to in my stocking. Let's see. So let's see what's in. Yep, the two baits that I would switch to if I was gonna. I found an area, but now I'm gonna slow down. The first would be a Ned rig. Okay.
Okay.
So I would take my Ned rig head, put it on a little TRD, and now that I've located fish, I'm gonna just work that bait along the bottom, a very small, finessey kind of bait, and see if I can get some bites doing that. And the other is a bait that we just did an Underwater Wednesday about, and that's the NACO rig. So the NACO rig, as we talked about in our Underwater Wednesday, it gives me the ability to work a little faster, but it's still a very subtle approach that works on the lower part of the water column. And so I think I'm going to get bit doing that as well. So either a Ned rig or a NACO rig would be my way to saturate an area that I think there are fish in. And then finally, I've got two more baits that are more in that search type category.
Okay.
One would be an umbrella rig. And Megan, I don't know if you've ever seen an umbrella rig, but this umbrella rig folds out, comes out just like an umbrella. It's got little teaser baits, and then attached to each one of these is a jig. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 baits swimming along. It looks like a ball of bait swimming along. These are great baits to attract fish. And again, in the wintertime, the bait fish are clumped up together, and this is definitely something that could attract a strike. And you have to be careful of what's allowed in your area, because not all states allow every bait on an umbrella rig to have hooks. So sometimes you put decoy baits on some of them so that you only have hooks on a certain number. Check your local regulations with regards to fishing an umbrella rig, but that is definitely an option. And finally, in the same vein, I always get amazed at the fact that our containers hold so many baits. I don't know how that works, but would be fishing small swim baits. These are Kitex. I typically start with a 2.8, maybe go up to a 3.3. But again, remember, we're talking about small baits. Really, as of late, I like throwing even these small baits on the new Core Tackle tush rig. That rig that puts the weight inside the bait instead of having a head weight on the outside. I really like the way that works, and Core Tackle just recently has come up with tush rigs that are smaller size for smaller swim baits. So I would definitely use the tush as my jig on that type of bait. But again, those are mimicking smaller bait fish, and that's what the bass are keying in on. We're going back now with this to our 3 search baits were an umbrella rig, a jerk bait, and the swim jigs. And then once we found them, we would be going to the blade bait or the NACO rig or the Ned rig. So those are the baits that I would use in the winter. But here's a couple of things. We talked about tactics, one being search and find, okay? The other that is very, very important to me is make a decision about when you're going out for success. If you can catch a wintertime situation where you are just before a front moves through, those fish are going to be active. The illustration with this is, and Carl called me and said, oh, Mark, we did real well. This was just a week ago. Said, we did real well on my local area pond. Well, that night I was driving home and I was seeing deer moving. I was seeing all sorts of activity down behind the barn and things like that. Kind of put it together, because guess what happened the very next day?
It was a really cold day?
It was really cold and it stormed. There was snow and rain and sleet. It was just before the front came through. And so if you can time your fishing to be in a situation where you're coming in just before a front, those fish are going to be active during that time. Doesn't matter whether it's 30 degrees or 50 degrees, they're going to be active. So pay attention to your weather and make sure you time your fishing trip to be before that. The opposite is true, because Carl went out the very next day thinking, hey, it was so good, I'm going to do it. Didn't catch a thing. Well, that barometric pressure had changed. Those fish were completely locked down. And so I think that that's kind of an indicator there. The next thing that I want to talk about is where to look. And something that I've come across in the last couple of years that I think, and it's just paid off time after time in the late season fishing, is if you can locate an area where fish used to be in the summer, say a shallow area with lily pads or weeds, and it drops off and then turns into a little, like a ditch, for example, or a little deeper area. A lot of times what'll happen in the winter is those fish will congregate in the ditch right in front of, or right near where they used to be in the summer. And especially if that edge has grass on it, they'll get right up, tucked up next to that grass, but again, belly's in the dirt right up on that edge. And so that would be an area where if I caught fish and I noticed that that's what was going on, I'd be looking for more fish in that little depth change area. That's an area that I look for now, and a lot of times when I'm looking for that type of a situation, that's where I'm finding fish. So guys, I hope some of these tactics go along with the baits that we're talking about, and hope if you can get out in the wintertime when the weather's nice to give one more shot at catching a couple big bass, or if you happen to live in an area where the weather doesn't get as terrible as it does up here, you can get out there and try some of these baits and tactics on your body of water this winter. Guys, we appreciate you tuning in. As always, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like and the subscribe button, we would appreciate that. And we hope that you have a good weekend. We'll see you again on Monday on Mark Fisher Outdoors.
Stay channeled.